All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies class, I have been creating a series of videos based off of the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. I am in the third part of this, which is on CSS, and out of the 4 modules that are in here, I'm in the third module, which is on styling text. And now we're going to talk about fundamental text and font styling. Some of the material that's in here, you might say, well, we've already gone over it. And yes, we have, because sometimes when I want to explain one topic, I have to at least delve into another topic. All right. All right. As you've already experienced in your work with HTML and CSS, text inside of an element is laid out inside of that element's content box, starting in the upper or top left, if it's a left to right or an LTR language like we're using. And it flows, as it says, towards the end of the line. So once it reaches the end, it goes to the next line and it continues in that way. Nothing really new there. All right, text content effectively behaves like a series of inline elements laid out in lines adjacent to one another. Okay? So the properties typically used to style text fall into 2 categories, those being font styles and text layout styles. So we'll begin, as you'd probably guess, with font styles. As it says, they affect the font that's applied to the text, how big it is, things like is it bolded or not bolded, etc. And then we'll go into the layout, which will talk about things like spacing between words or spacing between lines, how text is aligned, etc. So, nothing big here. It says, let's move straight into talking about fonts. In this example, we'll apply some different CSS properties and see what it looks like. So let's grab this. This will become our new finished example, as I've been kind of perusing my way through this. So we can take this, all this stuff that we put in earlier, all this CSS at least, and just remove it. All right, and let's come over here and our body where we had that big table before. I'm going to remove that and just replace it with this. So we've got what? First, we've got an H1 tag that says Tommy the cat. Sorry, I thought I turned my phone off. All right, sorry about that. Like I said, I thought that I had turned my phone's volume down. Evidently, I had not. So, I'm going to quickly play with this so it looks a little nicer so we can see everything that's on here. Almost finished. All right, so if I take a look at what we've got right now, which isn't going to look like much, all right, you've been warned. It's just going to be some text. I must have closed this, so I think it's the download one, isn't it? That's it. Now we can blow it up, but it's no big thing one way or the other. All right, so it's just a couple paragraphs and an H1 heading. All right, let's just continue on then. And again, so if we come in here and we add this, what should that do? Well, as shown here, it should make our paragraph red, right? Our 2 paragraphs. It'll do nothing to the H1 tag because we haven't told it to do anything to the H1 tag. So if I come up here, put that in, again, that'll make the paragraphs red. That should make sense really to everybody here. So since that's a paragraph, and since that's a paragraph, those should both be red. Let's double check. And you notice that they are. Now, had we wanted, we're not told to do this, But had we wanted that H1 to be red as well, we could have said H1 comma and either put these on the same line or on different lines. But had we done this, then the H1 tag would have been red as well. We were not asked to do that, so I am going to get rid of that on here. All right. And let's see. To set a different font, you use the font family. Now, we're going to just use the fonts that are available in here. All right. So I'll do again what they're doing here, and we'll change the font, which says we want to use Arial. Now, they may mention this a little bit later. In fact, let's just bring that into here. But typically, if you're going to put in a font family, you always end up with either a serif or a sans serif at the end. It's just good. It's a good idea. Also, when you do this, if you come in here and let's pretend for a second that we want a Times New Roman. Right now, that would be erroneous. There are blanks here and here, so we would have to take this and put it into double quotes. And then, of course, our comma. All right, just to show you that. Now, I've mentioned this term before, and it's nothing I've coined, but you get immediate feedback. In fact, let's make this, we'll leave it red. But let's see if the font changes quite a bit from what it is, because I don't know what the default font is on here. But notice, as soon as I refresh, all right, it is now an Arial font. And that's just for the paragraphs. It's not for the H1 tag. All right, but it does look much different than it did just a couple of minutes ago. All right, speaking of font availability, there are only a certain number of fonts that are generally considered available across all systems that you can use without worrying too much. These are typically referred to as Websafe fonts. Here's a list. Arial, which is a sans serif. Courier New, which is a monospace. Georgia, which is a serif font. We'll talk about serif versus sans serif in a bit. Times New Roman, which is a serif. Trebuchet MS, which is a sans serif. And Verdana, which is a sans serif. All right. Now, they mention here, I guess it's now is the time. Thought it was a little later, but that's fine. It says CSS defines 5 generic names for fonts: serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, and fantasy. And the thing that's nice about the example here is they give examples of each one. All right, so what's the difference between a serif and a sans serif? Well, take a look at the letter M, and you may be able to notice here, this is all kind of squared off, for lack of better words, where this is not. So as they mention here, fonts that have serifs, says the small strokes and details you see at the end in some typefaces, as opposed to sans serif, sans meaning without the serif. Monospace, all right, it's where every character has the same width, and usually you use that if you're putting in computer code and not for many other reasons. Cursive, as it says, it's meant to simulate handwriting. Notice it's not really cursive, all right, but it's meant to look a little bit like cursive. And then fantasy, which is more decorative in the way it's set up, all right. But we could add any of these in that we wanted to, all right. I'm just to show you this, we could have come in here and, for example, instead of Arial, we could have first said in here fantasy. And you will notice that the minute or the moment that you do that and you come back over here and you refresh, you can see just how different that looks. All right. Personally, I think that's too much to put in there, so I'm just going to get rid of it. Come back again and refresh again to make sure that looks the way I want it to look. All right. As it says, since you can't guarantee the availability of all fonts because you never know what type of computer the user is using on to view the web page and exactly what browser they're using. So typically, as I've started to show, you put in a whole family. So let's grab the family that they've put in here. The way this works is it says, hey, if Trebuchet MS is available, use that. If it's not, try to use a Verdana. If a Verdana is not available, use a sans serif. So it starts at the beginning and it works its way through until it either finds something or it gets to the end where you typically put a default in there. So let's grab this. Let's change our family as shown. Again, since Trebuchet, however you pronounce that, since it has a blank space, we put it in double quotes. You actually can put each one in their own set of double quotes. It's a little repetitive to do that, but you can do it if you want to. So I don't want the word font family in there twice. I want it like this. So let's see how that made it look. All right, it may not look that different, all right, but it is a different font family that's put in there right now. All right, let's just pause for a moment here. All right, sorry about that. And as we go on, the next thing is font size. We've talked a little bit about M's and Rems, etc. before. Remember, pixels are an absolute unit. M's and Rems are relative units. The difference between an M and a Rem is notice that one M is equal to the font size of the parent of the current element, whereas Rems, one Rem is equal to the font size of the root element. All right, not the parent element. Says this makes doing the maths to work out your fonts much easier. I usually use Rems, but maybe that's just me. All right. Things become trickier when you start altering the font size of nested elements. Okay. So they've got a sizing example in here, and I guess this is the one we've been working with, right? So it says the font size should be 10 for our HTML. So that's kind of the default size. It's 10 pixels. This is 5 rem, so that should be pretty big. This is 1.5 rem, so it should be 1.5 times 10 or 15. So let's take all of this, and just so that we have a little variety, let's make the color, I don't know, orange instead of red. And let's take a look at it. So you notice this got bigger. This didn't change too much. I think before it was set to 16 pixels, and now it's basically the equivalent of 15 pixels, but it did change color. Font style, font weight, text transform, text decoration. Let's hit on each one of them. Font style, normal is the default. So the only one I've really used has been italic. It says oblique is a simulated version of italic. I've never used that. I just always, if I want to, I'll use italic. Font weight is for bold. Notice you can do that by putting bold. All right. Or you can use numbers 1 through 100. All right. There's a text transform to put it in uppercase, lowercase, title case, etc. And a text decoration, which will underline things, show no underline, or a line through. So they want us to come in here and add a couple things. So let's make these changes here. I'll go back to red as far as my coloring there. It already was, that was already 10. So let's see what we've got here. So our H1s should have a font size of 5 rem. That's going to be big, and it should be in capital letters. Any paragraphs, I believe, that are right off the H1 should be bolded. All other paragraphs should be 1.5 rem, red with a Helvetica font. All right, so taking these changes, let's take it and refresh the page. So notice the only one that was bolded was the one immediately underneath the H1. All right. And everything else just changed to red. And other than that, there weren't too many changes made to it. So you can make very big changes by not doing too much. Some text shadow. Now this, again, this one is one I've always got to look up. As it says, there's 4 values shown. The color of the shadow is the last thing. Then the horizontal offset, the vertical offset, the blur radius. It says the higher means the radio it's dispersed more widely. 0 is no blur. All right. So let's take a look at this. Let's add this to our H1. All right, so let's take a look and see what that looks like then. It'll all be right here. All right. And again, you draw your own conclusions over whether that's helpful, hurtful, etc. Again, remember certain things. Again, that remember we talked before about people who are colorblind, etc. All right. All right, so we've got that done. I think we'll stop it right here before we go into the letter and word spacing, and we'll put that into the next lesson.